Welcome back to this sequence of trainings on raising stewardship dollars, developing stewardship culture for new church start work. Thanks for working with me on learning these principles. Last time we talked about the basic notion that people tend to want to give to the future, and that's the reason for strategic planning. People like to give to the future vision of your ministry, and the degree to which you can present that with integrity, clarity, and expose it in depth to those givers who may want more detail is the degree to which you'll win the confidence and earn the right to receive donations from potential givers. The first time we were together, we really talked about the basic biblical notions of stewardship. I hope those are sinking more deeply into your heart and mind so that you're moving less apologetically, perhaps more confidently when you approach donors with a vision that God has given you and an opportunity they have to grow as a steward and become a partner in your vision to reach new people for Christ. This time, we really want to talk about what it's like to enter into a conversation with a potential donor and have that transformational talk about stewardship. I mean, how do you actually move people from here to there, from where their present reality dictates emotionally to the reality biblically that we want them to grow to? In fact, I shared with you this design, this sequence of steps, stair steps, from fear to guilt to social obligation to social satisfaction, obedience, and ultimately worship, moving from an egocentric to a sociocentric to an actual theocentric understanding of my relationship to the resources God entrusts to me and to the ministries that I'm in partnership with. I'm hoping that that roadmap becomes more and more defining for you as you work with actual people and begin to think about their growth and use some of these categories to begin to perhaps understand, how do I move them forward one step at a time? I always wish people would jump stairs, like you see some people climb a set of stairs 2 or 3 at a time. But that's not usually the case. Most people take one stair step of development at a time. So think with me about change emotions. When someone is confronted with the opportunity to change, in this case, the relationship they have with their pocketbook, here's an axiomatic phrase to bear in mind. There is no change without discomfort. There is no change without discomfort. Oftentimes when we engage in a conversation with someone about the potential of them making a stewardship decision, we feel uncomfortable. We feel uncomfortable emotionally. We feel like the skin on our hands gets like super sensitive, or on our arm. You might even feel a little flush in your face. I don't know what happens to you, but there's a physiological discomfort that happens whenever you go into that zone of asking people about what they perceive to be, their resources. See, here's what we would like to do today is to normalize that you're exactly where you're supposed to be when that happens. Don't get me wrong. No one's calling for crude, offensive, or clumsy communication here. We're just acknowledging that even when the communication is gracious, and when the timing is right, and when there's well-articulated message, it still feels uncomfortable. And the reason is because you're calling for change, and there is no change without discomfort. The fancy $2 word for this is homophily and heterophily. Sociologists that think about cultural change, they think about moving an organization or an individual from a homophilous situation where there is great comfort and great stasis, great stability, to a heterophilous situation where there is now change, upsetting of thoughts, and a discomfort at an emotional level. And so that not only is occurring within you, but it's also occurring within the person that you're sharing the opportunity to change with. This is just normal stuff. It's just the way it is. And I still, to this day, when I go to ask a donor to make a contribution, If it's someone who's close to me, someone I have a good relationship with, I still feel a little bit kind of awkward in that moment. And I say, well, it's because I'm changing to some extent the nature of the relationship I have with this person. That is, I'm moving into a discipling relationship with them. I'm changing the game up. I have to expect that because they can't really make an authentic and significant change unless I change the game up a bit in our relationship. And relationship's the key, right? Is that you have to, and that's the second point there's no change without comfort. That you have to have a comfort level established in the relationship first before you introduce the discomfort. Nobody's saying you go charging into this awkward conversation with a stranger. That's just weird, right? But whenever you form relational equity, this then is the moment then to upset the game a bit, appropriately, right time, in the right way, but to expect the discomfort that goes with change. Planting advance and change is often the result of effective communication. So let's move from talking about change emotion to change communication. Words are your most basic tool, and being skillful in the use of words is a key ingredient to the kind of results that you want to achieve in stewardship development. Only your relationship plus gracious communication and the work of the Holy Spirit will overcome a fundamental resistance in most people. Back to the screw tape letters and C.S. Lewis. I mean, this runs so deep in all of us. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine. It's none of your business to come asking that which belongs to me, mine. The use of good words, effective communication, along with your relationship becomes really, really critical for that heterophilous moment of introducing change. So think about communication barriers. If you took a college class in communication, perhaps English course somewhere back there, you maybe remember the professor saying it's amazing that communication occurs between people. I mean, there's a series of screens that exist between the sender and the receiver. That is to say that the sender, in sending a message, communicates out of their presuppositions, their experience, their environment, even the language set that they have available to them. They communicate out of that, and the receiver, they hear through a series of screens as well. They hear through their language set and through their experience and through their environment and through their presuppositions. We have a foster son at our house. He's from the Congo, and we deal with this on a daily basis. No, actually, I'm married to a wonderful woman, and we deal with this on a daily basis. That there's these screens that exist between the sender and the receiver that people who talk about communication theory say it's a wonder that anybody gets a message through. We have to think about that when we think about communicating the vision we have for our ministry, our request to a donor to consider that vision and a partnership with it. What's the language you're using? Take another look at it. Is it the language that'll make sense to the receiver? What's the experience you're communicating out of? Is it an experience that will resonate with the person who's hearing your pitch? What are the presuppositions you have that are driving you in your messaging? And are they presuppositions that are shared by your listener? So these are all principles of basic communication that we all have to bear in mind when we're thinking about communicating a stewardship opportunity with a new donor, because there's all that resistance going on. There's all that emotional anxiety and discomfort occurring. And now we're trying to communicate over the top of that or in the midst of that. I've found a tool that I would like to recommend and commend to you today is a conversation guide as a way of, to some degree, addressing the difficulty in communication and making some significant advance and progress in light of that difficulty. The conversation guide goes like this. As you're communicating about your ministry and you have an opportunity to share with a donor, and you approach them and say, I'd love to share a bit about an opportunity to be a partner with something I'm very excited about, and I've given a big part of my life to at this stage. Would you be willing to listen to a vision and an opportunity for you to be a partner? And if they're willing to go there, and you have an opportunity to sit down with them, then here's a conversation guide that you can walk them through. Now, understand, it's not in a mechanical sort of a way, but it is a systematic way of answering the questions that ultimately begin to come up in the minds of folks if they're going to make a significant stewardship decision in your direction. Yeah, again, if you're asking folks to give you a few bucks, this is probably not necessary. But if you're asking a potential donor to make a significant gift, I worked with my parents not too many years ago as they were in their 80s, and they were trying to steward out their resources during their remaining years. And honestly, they were kind of waiting for people or hoping people would make an approach. They were teasing a few folks that they had been in relationship over the years with, saying, hey, what's going on in your work? We'd love to an update on what you're doing. We've been involved in your ministry in the years past. We'd love to hear what's going on. They would have responded so generously if those individuals would have had something like I'm going to lay out for you here today. Let's call it's something for people to put on their coffee table or put on their business desk to think about and to contemplate as they consider making a significant donation. The questions are, who are you? What's your mission? What's your vision? State it clearly. Number 2, why are you necessary? Why is it that planting a church in this particular environment is necessary? Give us a picture. Speak to my head about that. Speak to my heart about that. These are 2 dimensions of a case statement. And by the way, this conversation guide is classically referred to as making the case. It's a case statement. Anyone who does development work would tell you that forming a case statement is central to fundraising. Answering the question, why are we necessary? And then having an answer that speaks both to my head. There hasn't been a new church started in this area for a certain number of years. Or there's an underserved group of people in this area, and we can measure that by such and such. Or we're necessary here because your son and daughter-in-law have a home in that neighborhood near this place we're seeking to plant a new congregation, and we would love to touch their lives with the goodness of God through Jesus Christ. You hear the difference between those 2 answers of why we're necessary. One speaks to the head, one speaks to the heart. The extent to which you can use both languages, the extent to which you're really going to make the case with a donor. Step number 3, what's your track record? Why is it that you're a credible receiver of funds? There's a number of ways in which you can articulate that. You can articulate that in terms of the number of years of experience you've had in ministry. You can articulate that in terms of the assessment protocols you've been through by the annual conference and how you've been endorsed by leadership in the annual conference as a church planter or developer. But what can you say about your track record? Another dimension you might include is that you have lived in this community or you have significant relational connections in this community that you're seeking to be a developer, which really takes us into the next category. What's the need or the opportunity? That can be articulated in the way I was just saying around your proximity to the area that you're planting in. But it could also be the need or the opportunity is driven by any number of other factors. That there's a sponsoring agent that would love to see a church plant there, that the annual conference is supporting church plants, and this is an opportunity for you, a gifted church planter that's been assessed to take advantage of that annual conference objective of planting churches and to be involved in the mission. Why are we necessary? What's our track record? What's the opportunity that's uniquely presenting in this particular context that you're being called to plant in? And then number 5, what's the plan? Which takes us back to our lesson last time on strategic planning, articulating that plan in a concise form, and then what's the cost? And finally, the question, are you willing to become a partner? That's a conversation guide. It takes people from the big picture through some of the relevant details and into the opportunity to become a partner. A conversation guide like that is the first step. Failure to make the case for stewardship and a stewardship decision is really the first failure in a new church start. Can I say that again? Failure to make the case for a stewardship decision is the first failure of a new church plant. If you can't convince someone else to support this effort, you got a real problem on your hands. You don't have a credible effort, evidently. Being able to make a compelling case, to speak to head and heart and say, this is worthy of the support of donors for a variety of reasons, and here's an explanation of why. That's someplace we've all got to be there. We all have to have an elevator speech, and we've got to have a lunch speech. And the conversation guide that I'm laying out here is probably a lunch speech or something that you would send to someone after a phone call and then follow up with a phone call and have a chance to engage them around. It's clear, it's concise, it's laser focused on those 5-6 key questions, and I believe it needs to be laid out in an attractive sort of a format. So developing your case statement's a blend of head and heart. It requires great pictures. Under that question of what's the opportunity, I oftentimes see planter developers, they'll insert there a picture of their existing launch team. There are few things that are compelling to a potential donor than to see 20, 40, 50 people or so in a group and saying, and those are the people that are behind me in this project. You know, it's like the train's leaving the station. Wouldn't you want to get on board and be a donor for that kind of initiative? Now, you say, well, you don't have that many people yet. Well, here you go. Case statements have to go through multiple iterations. Your first case statement only may be a picture of you and 5 other people. This is your core team. Then shift up your case statement as your ministry grows. Mature that statement so it speaks more passionately, more up to date, more compelling of the opportunity that donors have to join the movement and what's going on in your effort. Economy of words, less is usually more. Many of us get too wordy. Color and style, good graphics, editorial follow-up. Here's an example of a case statement from my friend Carlos Devatek in Detroit, Michigan. El Reino de Dios, the reign of God. And you can see that he's used all the principles and followed the simple format exactly the way he was trained. Why is this church plant needed in urban Detroit? What's our track record as a planter leader? What's the opportunity? What's the plan? What will this cost? And finally, will you join us? So you'll see the 2 pages there of Carlos's case statement. Lots of pictures, great pictures of lots of people. Carlos there involved in a baptism. Carlos with a squad of folks at his home. And you can do that too, and I commend this to you as a conversation guide, recognizing that moving people from where they are, it's my money, it's my agenda, to where you want them to be. I'm a steward, and where's God moving, and what opportunities does God have for me to participate in that? That moving people from where they are to where you want them to be comes through relationship, and it comes through acknowledging that there's no change without emotional discomfort, acknowledging that my words and the communication tools that I use are my most effective strategy for growing people and moving them up that ladder of maturity and development as a steward. I offer you one last slide here before we go to our action items from this session, and that slide has to do with effective communication methods. The sad news is far too many ministry leaders rely on letters or things that are spoken from platforms to do all of their communication work. And I have to tell you that that's really unfortunate, and it's also very ineffective. That sending a letter to someone is probably the least effective way of raising funds for your ministry. One of the reasons is it's the most emotionally comfortable. I can take that letter and toss it pretty easily and really not feel anything. But something profoundly happens whenever a person doesn't send me a letter, but they call me up and say, hey, could we meet for lunch? And we sit at lunch and we reconnect at the friendship level and the relational level that we've been in for however many years. And they tell me what's going on in their life. And then it comes around and sounds like I've been through this before, right? It's because I have. And they share with me their heart. God has put something on their heart. They want to be involved in a mission and a ministry and some activity. And they're wondering if I would consider being a donor. It is a gotcha moment. At least it gets me. I can't say no. I mean, they have shown me that they want to be in relationship with me. And they didn't just send me a letter or they didn't just talk at me from a platform behind a pulpit. They want to be in relationship with me. And that engages me. It opens my heart. It lowers my defenses. And honestly, it cuts through that it's mine, it's mine, it's mine, that I'm as programmed with as the rest of us are to think. And it causes my heart to open up and to grow as a steward in the grace of giving. So you see the scale there of least effectiveness, a letter to a congregation, or a letter to a person in a congregation, or a personalized letter to someone outside of your congregation, right? Or speaking to a small group, or person to person on the telephone, and then at the highest level effectiveness, person to person, face to face. Now I recognize that for many of you, you may not have the ability to talk with everyone that you'd like to challenge to give face to face. So you can use a combination of methods. And the method I illustrated a few moments ago of making a phone call to an individual and then following it up by sending them a case statement like I've illustrated to you from El Reino de Dios, and then following that up after that receiver has had a chance to talk with their spouse and to consider making a gift, and following that up with a phone call, asking them, what would you be willing to give? What would you be willing to consider? That's a nice strategy to manage communications. And we're going to talk in our next session about some deeper understanding and strategies around the kind of communications that you utilize during those conversations. The idea of a donor matrix and saying, we're looking for people to give a certain amount of money and challenging people with a certain amount of money. We'll talk about that in our next session. But between now and then, take a few minutes and develop your thinking about an attractive case for support document for donors using the conversation guide that we've illustrated here. No, that's not going to take a few minutes. It's going to take several weeks or at least days with several investments of time along the way to pull together an attractive conversation guide. So begin to work on that. And then secondly, test and refine your case for support with a friend's input. Remember, the communication is a challenge. People hear what they hear through screens. And so does your case for support communicate what you would like it to communicate as you seek to help others understand the opportunity that you're presenting to them? That concludes this session. I'll look forward to you for our next session together, in which we're going to continue the discussion about developing stewardship culture around the issue of earning the right to receive. What does it mean for you as a receiver to be credible in the eyes of a donor that wants to be wise, especially as they have perhaps a larger gift to give, and they look for who's a worthy recipient of my stewardship decisions? All right. Talk with you soon.